Since the rise of the new wave of British heavy metal scene back in the late 1970s, there have been a number of bands influenced by it. Even early Metallica heavily cribs from the genre. But does its influence extend to modern bands? Well, in this video, I'm going to discuss 9 records of modern note that fly the NWOBHM flag. I'm also going to discuss a brief history of the new wave of British heavy metal and the key bands in that genre. So, break out that Union Jack shirt and let's get chuffed! So before we start discussing modern bands, I'd like to go through a brief history of how we got to where we are with all of this. So, let's do that. The new wave of British heavy metal, as it was coined by music journalist Jeff Barton in a 1979 issue of Sounds, came at a time when the founding metal bands weren't doing so well. A second wave was emerging before this, including bands such as Judas Priest, UFO, and AC/DC, but these were more mainstream acts. The bands that constitute what would be known by the rather troublesome acronym of NWOBHM took some influence from the original metal bands, but also brought in some of the speed and attitude of the emerging punk scene of the time. And while these bands, by and large, had their regional followings in the pub scene, they weren't exactly getting signed by major labels. The exceptions, of course, were Iron Maiden, Def Leppard, and Saxon, but there were many bands who, comparatively speaking, didn't find real or lasting success. However, many of these lesser-known bands were highly influential on metal genres we all know now, notably thrash and speed metal, as well as the death and black metal genres to come. One name that needs to be mentioned regarding the promotion of NWOBHM is Neil Kay. Kay was a London-based disc jockey who managed a rock club called the Bandwagon Heavy Metal Soundhouse, a venue that showcased many NWOBHM bands. Kay also promoted metal shows and managed metal bands later on. He is a name that should not be ignored in metal history. Also of importance was the Friday Rock Show, which was a BBC Radio 1 program presented by Tommy Vance. Many NWOBHM bands got a great deal of national exposure on Vance's show, including Diamond Head, Angel Witch, Girl School, and Sweet Savage, to name but a few. And since I've probably been throwing around some names you might be unfamiliar with, I'd like to quickly go through 18 bands that define the new wave of British heavy metal. I say quickly because I've gone through a lot of these albums in depth in other videos. So keep that in mind, and you know what? Take notes too. You might want to get a few of these. Of course, any discussion on NWOBHM must start with Diamond Head. This is the White Album, also known as Lightning to the Nations. This is their first album. This is a very influential album. Metallica covered 4 songs from it. The Prince, Helpless, Am I Evil, and It's Electric. Had to look. Great little album. If you're getting into Diamond Head, I would start with this album. Borrowed Time is okay, but you should start with this record. Next up is Angel Witch. This is 70s tapes. This is early material for the band. If you're getting into Angel Witch, you could check this out, but I really would start with their 1980 self-titled debut album. It's a classic and it's amazing. So, Angel Witch. Of course, Tigers of Pantang also needs to get mentioned. This is Wildcat. Great little album. Their first couple of albums are pretty decent. I would actually check out the follow-up album to this called Spellbound. It has John Sykes on guitar. Of course, John Sykes, ex-Whitesnake, ex-Thin Lizzy, great guitar player. So check out either one of those albums. Spellbound maybe a little bit more than Wildcat, but Wildcat's pretty good too. Of course, there's also Girl School. This is Hit and Run. This is their second album. Great female NWOBHM band. And yes, I do call them NWOBHM. I know a lot of people say they're the female Motorhead, which makes no sense whatsoever. This band has a lot more in common with the Runaways, for Christ's sake. A lot of female bands back in the early 80s did. The Runaways were one of those bands that were highly influential on the ladies in the hard rock and heavy metal scene. So, Girl School, this is a great album. I would also look into Demolition, the album before that. Those are the 2 classic Girl School albums I would highly recommend. Of course, we have to talk about Raven. This is All for One. The Great Raven, of course, is the first 3 records, plus the live album after this actually, called Live at the Inferno. All of that is amazing stuff for that band. Classic era. So, good album. Raven, All for One. A lesser-known band is Bitches Sin. This is Invaders. Bitches Sin is okay. They're one of those bands that you have to mention because they get floated on a lot of comps, a lot of NWOBHM comps of early note. So there they are. Bitches Sin. They're okay. Of course, the Mighty Samson has to be discussed. This is Head On, featuring Bruce Dickinson, later of Iron Maiden, on vocals. I would definitely either start with Head On or Shock Tactics, which is the other album. And then after that, Samson's okay. Once Bruce Dickinson leaves, goes to Iron Maiden, the band's okay. So the classic albums, Head On or Shock Tactics, if you're going to get into Samson. Next is Cloven Hoof. This is the BBC sessions, much like 70s tapes from Angel Witch. This is early material, some demo stuff, there's some BBC stuff, obviously. Cloven Hoof, cool band. I would start with their self-titled debut album if you're going to be getting into them. Cloven Hoof. Next up is Tokyo Blade. This is Night of the Blade. Can't go wrong with their first two albums in general. This is their second. They have a self-titled album before this. Great little band. And not from Tokyo. They're from England. Witchfinder General, classic band. This is Friends of Hell. I would actually start with Death Penalty. It's the album, I think, before this. Great stuff and wonderful covers. You'll never forget them once you see them. Of course, we have to talk about Holocaust. This is a live album called Hot Korean Wine. Obviously, the classic album from Holocaust is The Nightcomers. I highly suggest you track that down. Hopefully, there's a reissue somewhere because it's a fairly expensive record, which is why you're not seeing it here. Holocaust, great band. Also, Metallica covered The Small Hours from this band, as you might remember. Next up is Demon. This is Night of the Demon. They're okay. This is probably the album to check out. Have to mention them because they get mentioned in NWOBHM lists. So there you go. Demon. Likewise with Witchfind, this is Lords of Sin. It's okay stuff. It's a little more hard rockish. I don't know if they're trying to be AOR later on, but it's okay. The cover's spookier than the music really is, but there you go. Witchfind. Why not? Next up is Jaguar. This is Power Games. Classic NWOBHM band, absolutely. And this is the album you should really check out, Power Games. It's also been reissued in case you're looking for it. So there you go. Of course, Satan, we have to mention. This is Early Rituals. This is a new release. If you're looking for Satan, the classic album is Court in the Act. Classic stuff. You should definitely check out Satan. Plus, they got a great name. How can you go wrong? Of course, I have to talk about the Mighty Saxon. This is Power and the Glory. Great little record. As far as the classic Saxon stuff, it's this album and Back in the catalog that you probably should be paying attention to. Of course, also there are other classics like Denim and Leather and Wheels of Steel. Great early Saxon. This is a band you should not pass up as far as getting into NWOBHM. They also have really great stuff now. If you haven't checked out Thunderbolt, incredible album from 2018. Saxon. Of course, we were discussing the bigger bands that came out of the NWOBHM scene. Of course, Def Leppard is one of them. This is On Through the Night. This is their debut album. Great stuff. Very much NWOBHM sounding. Later, they would move away from that in subsequent albums, especially once we get to High and Dry and Pyromania, with the influence of Mutt Lange, their producer at that time. So, this is an interesting early glimpse into Def Leppard. I recommend this record. I think it's pretty interesting. And again, very NWOBHM. I do save the best for last. This is Iron Maiden, 1980 debut album. They're the band that really made it out of this NWOBHM scene, and they're incredible, and you know that. So, this is obviously the album you start with. Also, Killers is really great, too. Some people prefer Killers to this record. Take your pick, but can't go wrong with either one. Iron Maiden. Of course, some of you will notice that I haven't mentioned Venom or Motorhead yet. There are reasons for that, so let's get into them. Motorhead pretty much predated the rise of NWOBHM and came up along with bands such as Judas Priest and Rainbow. It could also be argued that Motorhead's overall style doesn't really flush up with many of the musical aspects of bands in the NWOBHM scene. As for Venom, they are at best outliers of the NWOBHM scene and have a lot more in common with Motorhead than some of the more hard rock-leaning NWOBHM bands that dominated the scene. Yes, Venom gets lumped in with NWOBHM by a lot of folks, but I'm no longer buying it. Other than being British and coming out around the same time, they otherwise don't fit, and they'd be the first ones to tell you that. So getting that out of the way, let's discuss some modern bands who are influenced by the new wave of British heavy metal to one degree or another. First up is Riot City. This is their debut album from 2019 entitled Burn the Night. They're a Canadian band, traditional metal meets speed metal with some falsetto vocals. A lot of people compare this band to Judas Priest. I don't hear it as much. I hear a little bit more of 80s Accept than I do Priest. But I would say definitely with the sweeping riffs as well as the vocals, this definitely puts this music into NWOBHM territory. NWOBHM sounding territory. Anyways, Riot City. Next up is Skeletor with Cyber Metal from 2019. This is their 5th studio album. They are an American metal band. Speed metal, but also epic metal. They definitely have some influence from Iron Maiden, which is much of why they're getting mentioned here. Also some Halloween and Sabbath. Early Halloween, I wouldn't go too much into the later catalog. Galloping riffs are here. Some twin guitar back and forth stuff. Definitely the riffage is very NWOBHM sounding on a lot of levels, so that's what connects this to that. Next up, of course, is High Spirits. This is Hard to Stop, came out in 2020. This is their 4th studio album. Definitely a lot of NWOBHM worship going on here. Of course, this band is a one-man band. That's Chris Black, of course. He's done a number of bands. This one definitely harkens back to NWOBHM, at least for me, the most. He does a lot of retro metal music and hard rock, of course, especially from the 1980s, especially the early 1980s, so the timelines kind of flush up here. The riffage is very much NWOBHM here, and maybe more on the poppier side of NWOBHM, but it's definitely in there. So yeah, there you go. High Spirits. Next up is Enforcer with their 5th studio album entitled Zenith. This came out in 2019. They are a Swedish metal band. They came out of the new wave of traditional heavy metal scene, which is interesting because obviously that's a playoff of the new wave of British heavy metal. And I don't think that's an accident. I think there's a lot of overlap in the two scenes, quite a bit. I think Enforcer kind of shows that as well. To be fair, the NWOBHM influence in Enforcer is more prominent on previous albums. This one gets a little bit away from that in a sense. This one is a little bit more mid-pace, where the earlier stuff was a little more in the speed metal category. Also, this sounds a little bit more hard rock or 80s mainstream metal, take your pick, but still quite a bit of NWOBHM going on here. Anyways, Enforcer. Of course, I have to talk about Haunt. This is Burst into Flame, came out in 2018. Fun fact about Trevor Church, I don't think a lot of people know, is that Trevor is the son of Bill Church. Bill Church was one-time bass player for Montrose. He's on that first album, but he's better known for being the bass player from Sammy Hagar's solo career throughout the remainder of the 70s and the first half of the 80s. In fact, VOA, that last Sammy Hagar solo album he did before he went to Van Halen, has Bill Church on it. And he's no doubt in the I Can't Drive 55 video. He has to be. So, fun little fact there. So Haunt is definitely one of those bands that outright professes to be heavily influenced by NWOBHM. There's no ambiguity about it. Trevor Church has talked about it before. You can really hear it in the lead guitar work. I think I hear a little bit of Angel Witch, a little bit of Diamond Head. It's unmistakable. Haunt definitely has a number of albums out. Mr. Church is quite prolific in that regard, as many know. So you should definitely check out Haunt. Next up is Pounder with their 2nd full-length album called Breaking the World. Came out in 2021. This is definitely a NWOBHM-influenced band. There's also some Swedish hard rock, modern Swedish hard rock going on in here. I'm thinking Crazy Licks, for instance. There's also kind of an undercurrent of power metal going on. So maybe saying Manowar meets Crazy Licks meets Diamond Head? Maybe. Pretty cool band, though. Of course, if you need another connection to NWOBHM, guitarist Tom Draper in this band was also in the live version of Angel Witch in the 2010s. And maybe now, I'm not sure if he's doing both bands at this point, but that's about as close of a connection to NWOBHM as you can actually have, is by being in a classic band of that genre. So, pretty cool. Also, I hear a little bit of early Tigers of Pantang in the vocals. Can't be helped. So, another connection there. So, there it is. Pounder. Check it out. Next up is a band I probably haven't talked about on this channel, and I don't know why. This is Savage Master with their 3rd studio album entitled Myth, Magic, and Steel. Came out in 2019. Definitely more on the metal end of the new wave of British heavy metal sound, for sure. A lot of buzzy guitars and some melody and galloping riffs. Definitely trademarks of that sound. But unlike a lot of the NWOBHM bands, this one has a female singer. There weren't a lot of girls in the new wave British heavy metal scene. Girl School aside, maybe Rock Goddess if you want to count them. I think they came a little bit later, so I don't count them. But yeah, Savage Master, pretty cool band. You should check them out. Next up is the 2019 self-titled debut album from Traveler. They are a Canadian metal band. Definitely some strong NWOBHM influence. They're galloping riffs, but there's also twin guitar harmonies. You definitely hear some allusions to Judas Priest a bit, but also to Riot, an interesting band there. By the way, Riot is not British, but it's in there. There's also some US power metal going on. I think mid-80s US power metal. So power metal and NWOBHM It's a nice little mix. Anyways, check out Traveler. And of course, any discussion on NWOBHM sounding bands would not be complete without Night Demon. This is their 2012 debut EP, self-titled. Very NWOBHM. Even the band itself admits that they are full-blown NWOBHM worship. It's in the riffs, it's in the vocals, it's in everything. You'll hear Diamond Head, Tigers of Pantang, Angel Witch, all of that. It's there. This is a reissue, by the way, a modern reissue from High Roller Records. It was just put out. So if you're looking for this EP, that's how you'll probably find it. They have a number of albums out as well. You should check them out. So there you are, Night Demon. Of course, I mentioned it before, but I should mention it again here. If you're looking for great books on the new wave of British heavy metal, the first place you should go is this one. This is Neat and Tidy, the story of Neat Records. Neat Records was a record label that was very important to a lot of these bands, especially their early days. They're known for having Venom, but there are other bands as well. I'm going to go through the appendix just to give you a rundown of some of them. Obviously, Tigers of Pantang is in here, Fist, White Spirit, Raven, Bitches Sin, Blitzkrieg, tons of bands here. Persian Risk is in here. Warrior, a lot of good bands. So this is a really good resource if you want to check this particular genre out. Also, I would recommend the books of Martin Popoff. He's done a few books on NWOBHM. You should check into him. P-O-P-O-F-F. In case you're unfamiliar with the man, you shouldn't be. He's a hard rock and heavy metal music journalist. He's on Banger TV. He does his own stuff. So definitely check out his work. Pretty cool. But check out this book too, Neat and Tidy. So if you're wanting an incredible sampling of original NWOBHM bands, you really can't go wrong if you get this record. This is the New Wave of British Heavy Metal 79 Revisited. Came out in 1990. It's a 2 LP set. This is the UK version. The US cover is a little bit different. In the US cover, these two pictures are missing, and you can actually see Samson drummer Thunderstick in the back. I don't know why he's covered up here. He always wore a mask, by the way. I don't know if the British censors back then were like, that's a naughty S&M mask. We can't have that, so cover it up. I don't know. I'm just guessing, kind of spitballing there, but this is the British version with the covered up Thunderstick picture. Don't know why. Lots of great bands on here. You should probably pause the video and write these all down because this is really a definitive list. This album was put together by Metallica drummer Lars Ulrich as well as Kerrang editor Jeff Barton. I talked about Jeff Barton. He is the one who coined the phrase new wave of British heavy metal. So the two of them collabed on this record and made an incredible list of bands to hear. So check this out. This is it. And that's my look at the bands that established the new wave of British heavy metal and the modern bands who were inspired by them. Definitely let me know which era you like the most. Maybe you like the old stuff, maybe you like the new stuff. Also let me know of any bands you listen to that pull from the classic era. Hell, just let me know anything relevant to the topic. Leave all of that in the comments below. I'd be really excited to hear from you guys, especially since NWOBHM is one of my favorite subgenres of metal. It really is. Of course, I cover all genres of metal here, the classic stuff, the modern stuff. This is the Accusation Network. I cover those genres specifically through vinyl. This is a metal vinyl collecting channel, of course. You should definitely check out my playlists and my videos if you're interested in that. Also, like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. All of those things super help out my channel. And of course, if you're a regular viewer, you should be checking out my Patreon account. It's at patreon.com/theaccusationnetwork. I have exclusive content there. I also show videos up to 7 days early. So go to that site, check out the reward tiers, and see how you can contribute. I think you'll dig it. And of course, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.